Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a very long-awaited podcast. I know it's been a while. I'm trying to get these going again, and what better way to kick these podcasts off again than with one of my favorite guests, Sleepezi. We are here today to talk about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Sleepezi, if somehow there is an FF7 fan out there who doesn't know what you do, please explain to them who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Sleepezi. I make theory videos on Final Fantasy VII Remake and now, I guess, the re-trilogy. I have been making content for like 3 years now, and I started like 2 months after, I think, the release of Remake, and have been just, my mind has been boggled ever since. Some of my videos range from like 30 minutes. Some of them are a little longer than that.
Just a little. Just a little
touch longer. But really my focus on my channel is like following compilation stuff, sort of breaking down the compilation stories, the thematic ties that they're sort of being brought in from there to the re-trilogy, which I personally just love. I love all of those like smaller details, and also just like going over references and other things that Remake has done. Pretty much I span the gamut of anything Remake, compilation, and the original, and I love them all equally. I don't have any favorites. I might like Crisis Core a little bit too much. But, yeah. So as of right now, I have a video coming out at some point, if I can find the time, like we talked about, to go over. I just got to play the demo for Rebirth a month ago, and that was super awesome. So shout out to Square for that. Yeah, and hopefully that will be out soon. And then obviously we have like TJ and all these other things coming out, so I'm sure you'll be seeing more content from me very soon. So
yes, very exciting. So we've been doing these chats now for a while, pretty much since not quite immediately after Remake came out, but I believe it was shortly after. I want to say our first chat was back in like maybe like mid to late 2020 or so.
Yeah,
when we first did our chat. I had you and BabySeal on here, and since then you guys have become some of the most awesome friends that I have, closest people that I have. Just incredible. And we are no longer, chat, just chronically online friends. We have in fact met in real life. We are IRL friends now. We got to meet at the Final Fantasy XVI launch party.
Yes,
which was
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. That whole event, by the way, I don't know about for you. First of all, it was a pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, you too.
And yeah. Thank you. My reputation precedes me, I'm sure. But like, it was super awesome just having that whole experience, because like we do these chats, it was super crazy because you'd be sitting there making videos. For me at least, and being like, maybe I'll get to meet these guys like one day. Maybe I'll get to meet like Phil or NSP or Blitzer or Seal. And the fact that like we not only did I get to see you guys in the flesh, you guys are like all legendary. Like all the expectations of that night were met meeting you guys. You guys are awesome, especially you, NSP. Like it was just a pleasure, the whole thing. So
it was an honor to meet all of you guys. Like it was kind of insane, really. Like it was like an internet convention for me. Like yes. I was getting to meet every single person that I collaborated with or had known or got to know for the past 6 years. Imagine that excitement, right? I'm here and I'm meeting people like Schrodinger's BabySeal, the Sphere Hunter, getting to meet Phil, Aaliyah, all those people all at once and all in one place and all at the same time. BioRox is in chat, which is awesome. Got to hang out with him.
Awesome.
Dude, it was very awesome. And just getting to meet everyone all at the same time, all in the same place, and then getting acknowledged,
Was that the first time that you ever had met like content creators in real life?
I'm trying to think
Like,
if
had you
there's like
gone to some other thing?
another like Final Fantasy content creator in particular. No, I think that was my first time that I actually got to meet like other like content creators for the first time. Like other than like, I mean, there are some people that I know. Like I know Dreamcast Guy, for example, in real life. But
Oh, okay.
but
Yeah, see, I don't know him. Oh, do you?
yeah,
Okay, I didn't know that, but yeah, that
yeah.
makes sense.
Oh yeah, you didn't know that? Like yeah,
I did not.
yeah, I'm like good IRL friends with Dreamcast Guy. I actually met Dreamcast Guy before I started YouTube, and I didn't know his channel or anything. He was just some guy that I was talking to about games.
That's awesome. That's
At a
actually
party.
like the sickest thing.
Yeah, that like my girlfriend introduced me to, and she was like, "Yeah, oh, by the way, he has a YouTube channel," and I was like, "Oh
You
yeah."
guys are both content creators, and you're like,
Yeah, and then I comes and then I like talked to him and was like, "Bro, I'm thinking about starting a YouTube channel," and he was like, "Oh yeah, you should do it," and then he was telling me all this stuff about YouTube and yeah, which is crazy. So, yeah, it's just very funny, right? So
It is.
Yeah, he's actually like the nicest guy, like in real life.
I haven't
So
had a chance to talk to him, but
yeah, he's a great guy. Have you gotten the chance to play Final Fantasy 16 yet?
I mean, the irony of this whole thing is that I like, and I think we all sort of had a moment like when we were at the event, like talking about like this is like a very like special moment to have all of us here, and we had like all of these like crazy interactions with one another, got to meet a ton of people. I have yet to touch the game.
Wow.
I have not touched 16 since playing it on literally at the event, and the night of, I guess it was like 1 a.m. after the event had already finished up, and we were all sitting there watching the opening. Which also, just by default, I think because of how magical the rest of the evening had already been. But then the moment where we saw the opening was really great. And then we played the demo of the combat ourselves on stage, me and Seal. And that is the only thing I've seen. I have not been spoiled from the story. I know nothing about what happens. And I'm looking forward to playing it, but I have not been able to find time at all to play this game.
Wow. Sleepezi, fake gamer.
That's right.
Can you guys believe him? Wow, this is unbelievable. Fake gamer. No.
There was supposed to be like, I think at some point, because there was all this discussion about like the lore of the game coming out before the game had come out, and then they had mentioned how like you could kind of, or we checked it out in the menus, right? During the demo, where you could pause and kind of like just read little tidbits of the story.
Details, yeah.
I thought that was super interesting, and I was like, well, maybe I'll make some content on this eventually. But I mean, ironically, the last video that I had not released my 5-hour magnum opus video at that particular time. Yeah. And after releasing it, Rebirth news immediately started coming out. And I was just like, okay, well, I no longer have time to play this. Did you enjoy 16? Because I've gotten some weird fluctuations of best and worst and all sorts of different opinions about it, which I think is a good thing. Right. Because it means that there is sort of like hit and miss qualities to it, but like super awesome gamer moments at the same time.
I think you're picking up on exactly what the consensus was. I titled my review of Final Fantasy XVI, Excellence Meets Imperfection. And I still think that's kind of a great way of describing the game. On one hand, I'd be playing 16, and there were moments of it where I'm like, wow, this is definitely my game of the year. There were fights with like Titan or some of the other icon fights. They were just out of this world cool, out of this world exciting. And then you'd have a moment like that, and then it would be preceded by doing some of the most benign, boring quests that you could humanly imagine, right? And so there was quite a lot of good in 16, but there was just also a lot of dry. I don't think it ever gets to the point of where it's just outright bad, but there are a lot of points where it is just kind of boring and not moving at a pace in which is like satisfactory enough to like really keep you engaged. But aside from that,
is it the parts? Because this is something that I think you and I and a lot of us in the background are also like sort of movie buffs, and a lot of the problem I have with like modern movies is that the formulaic aspect is that bad is no longer good, like funny bad, or like interesting bad in movies. It's hard to watch something and be like, wow, this is a train wreck, or like this is just like digital slop and there's nothing interesting to really talk about it, and then you just kind of forget about it after watching. Was the boring in 16 interesting boring? Is it like a conundrum, the game? Like, are you just sitting there baffled about how something so good can be in a game where also these are lulls? Or is it just typical, like, sort of game, like, sort of bland, where you're just like, okay, maybe I've seen this in other games and this wasn't effective then and it's not going to be effective now?
Yeah. I think Bioroxa says it here. It felt like Final Fantasy XIV MSQ filler. That's like a great way of describing it, honestly. I feel like the game would have been significantly more engaging if that stuff just wasn't in there and they just found ways to get to the awesome points faster. So I'm a huge proponent of, if you can't make the game all awesome moments or all interesting moments that contribute to the game overall, then make a smaller game, make a shorter game that gets to those moments faster. And while you may lose the marketing bullet point of having a longer game, you'll have a game that people think about and they're like, wow, every moment of that game was incredible, right? And having a game that's structured and paced like that feels a lot better. I feel like, 16 and part 1 of 7 Remake both, if those games are maybe like a few hours shorter, they probably would have been even better than what they were. And I know a lot of people get angry because they're like, shorter game mean less value for dollar, me mad.
Why spend $70?
Big game. Right, like why spend the but that's the thing though too, is that like personally I want, like, when I want a game, I want it to just get to the quality, right? Like I don't want just more game.
Well, I think
not if more game doesn't equal more quality, right?
Yes, and I actually am going to jump on the same bandwagon with you here, because having only experienced some of the combat in the demo and then playing the opening is so strong for me, and knowing nothing about the story, but I was just sitting there like, okay, like this star is going to become like an incredibly important thing. The fire references tied to the star shot in the opening sequence, then the Titan and Shiva fight sequence as you're like running through this area is so the breakneck speed of awesomeness, that to think that there's any point in which you pump the brakes on this sort of pace that they set, I could see being a little bit of a little whiplash moment, maybe, perhaps,
right.
If those filler moments are not as engaging or as spectacular.
Right.
But I will say that, like, what I have seen, I was like, well, I would definitely play a game regardless of that had these moments, because there's all sorts of cinema and all sorts of video games that do like one particular thing really well and maybe not other things as well.
For sure.
I still feel like those things are worth, playing at the end of the day, because you can take something valuable out of, maybe even B or C tier games. Not to say that 16 is, but just to say that there's always something to glean from this. So as long as they're pushing some form of the medium or like something forward to take away, that's great. Or even maybe best game experiences of all time, which is what Susie, I think, was saying, is that there's like a sequence in the game that she didn't spoil for me, that she was like, that might be one of the top 10 moments, but it's in this game that you have to kind of go through all this other stuff to get to, and it's like that right off the bat feels worth it to me. Then is that there's something valuable for me as an artist even, or a creator, to even see, because those are the things that are super inspirational. So
it's kind of a problem with, I feel, a lot of CVU3's games. A Realm Reborn, not quite their fault, obviously, but you have to go through all of that before you get to why 14 is this incredible narrative experience, right? And even then, there is always some sections within, after even post Realm Reborn, that definitely drag still. But the story is really incredible, and those moments hit and resonate with people so hard that it becomes like, you know, one of the most memorable experiences that people ever had. So I feel like they, especially when it comes to single player games, they kind of need to sit down and maybe take a look at the structure and pacing of their games and kind of figure out how they can keep the big moments that the team is really good at delivering, and not derail them with so much filler. Study a God of War or something, Subtext says, and I actually agree, right? Because I think if you play God of War Ragnarok, if 16 had gotten a little closer to like what God of War Ragnarok is, I don't think that people would have complained as much as they did. Because to me, you know, a lot of people tried to say, oh, it's because it's an action RPG, or because, you know, all of these other things. But I think that when you actually look at some of the source material that 16 was inspired by, I think if it actually got closer to some of that source material, people wouldn't have the cynical takes on it that they did. That being said, let's talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake. So when it comes to
nothing about this.
Yeah, I don't either. When it comes to FF7R, it's been an interesting journey, especially for me. So let's go all the way back to 2020, and let's talk about Punished NSP. I played through Final Fantasy VII Remake, loved the game, but I had some mixed reactions to the story. You know, I thought, obviously, the characterization, the dialogue, and those sorts of things, for the most part, were really excellent in the game. I thought they really captured the spirit and essence of Final Fantasy VII. However, where a lot of my criticism came from was with the remake sequel aspect, and with the Arbiters reviving dead characters, or in such cases, just straight up not killing characters. However, since then, I have had a lot of discussions with you and Seal and other people, and not only that, I've really taken a good hard look at various remakes, from, you know, more purist remakes, like say RE4 remake. I don't know if you'd call that really a purist remake per se, because there are definitely reimaginative elements, but something that stays a lot more faithful, right? Versus something like someone in chat says The Last of Us. Okay, yeah, that's you can call that a purist remake. RPG, Demon Souls, Mario RPG, yeah, for sure. Versus like some of the more experimental remakes, if you even want to call them that, such as Evangelion, the Nier Automata anime, which is having some really interesting deviations, and those sorts of remakes. And I really do think it is quite an interesting opportunity when you can remake a game, and the remake of that piece of media can be kind of a conversation with the original work. And it can also add on to it thematically, and not necessarily replace it, but be this thing that also stands next to it. Trigun was another one that I just thought of. There's also a really interesting remake that kind of pushed what remakes can even be. Again, even if you want to call this new genre of remakes a remake, right? Because it's not even necessarily a remake. And then yes, people in chat are mentioning the new Scott Pilgrim anime. So
Right, which I've also heard deviates to a degree. I think that this speaks to a lot of the issues, actually, almost perfectly, to why I enjoy both. I enjoy both the remakes of the sort of, oh, this is a remake, but it isn't. But then the faithful remakes, like Demon Souls is a really good example, just because Blue Point, is that what the studio is?
yeah, Blue Point.
They are so faithful to reconstructing every little piece of something. Demon Souls, though, for me, was a game that just never got a moment like Dark Souls or the other From Software games. And so remaking something like that so that it is accessible and playable was a very big thing for me. And I was just going to buy it just for the guise of that, because it was my first From Software game. And it was very impactful. So to be able to see the game not only look as good as it possibly could have, but now knowing that people could have access to play it because it was like, not anywhere other than the PS3, was a big deal to me, because then I could talk to more people about this game that I really liked and bosses that I fucking hate to this day. Whereas a game like Final Fantasy VII, which is so highly regarded, or Neon Genesis is another good example, Scott Pilgrim, like these are pieces of media that are held in such a high regard that I can still go back to, like, I still watch Scott Pilgrim, I still play Final Fantasy the OG, and I can maybe stomach like a watching of the original anime of Neon Genesis, because that one may have moments where it is aged well and then poorly in many other ways. But the idea of why I'm so compelled also just to these sort of rebirths of these kinds of games or pieces of media is because it's the auteur's sort of re-examination of themes and the evolution of where it started to where it's going. And I think with Neon Genesis was obviously like the first one of these things where you're just like, oh, like this is the first time where we're like retelling the story, but also deviating in such a intense way. Not to spoil anything, but there's a lot of things that, like, the character is very like internal, does not take action, and to see action taken from this character after going through the series into the movies was a huge deal. It was a huge pivotal moment. So to see that pay off, all of this character's growth pay off in this moment, meant so much to me. It's actually like that scene. There's a scene in 2.0 of Rebuild that is probably one of my favorite pieces of anime of all time, just because of how climactic and full the moment feels. Obviously, it leads to like a lot of other stuff, and I'm not even going to get into that. But that's a lot of why I think I was very open and accepting of like the re trilogy, as it's known now. It feels like all of these characters are getting a re-examination to not only make them fuller, like, and more fleshed out, but to almost push it farther than they've ever gone before. And that being handled with care, if they do it right, obviously, could mean so much more to so many people who already love Final Fantasy VII. Like, right. Cloud is already an infamous character. Sephiroth is an infamous villain. You have like a cast of characters that, like, all of them mean something to somebody. And even characters that meant nothing to people like you.
Right. Right.
Where you're just like, now they all feel like they're all being handled in the same sort of way that they should have always, not that they should have always been, but to a level that we want them to be, or didn't even think was possible. My favorite relationship, I think, from a villain to like protagonist and antagonist is probably Cloud and Sephiroth. I think that there's a lot of like good motivation just inherently in the OG, and a lot that is built upon that in like subsequent media that isn't like super important, but all built off of this relationship that they develop in Nibelheim and through like Cloud's ideology of soldier and all this stuff. To see what's happening in Remake, have that take center stage again and have more of it and have it mean more to what I already know of their relationship is so awesome. Like the whole the ending, while completely chaotic, to just be hanging on every word of what Sephiroth is saying at the end, because you know who this person is, but at the same time, it also feels like something deeply has changed between them, and you can't put your finger on it, is actually such like a high level of like, I think not artistry you could say, but mostly just like mental fuckery for the audience, where you're just like, this guy that I've known, this villain that is so iconic, has changed in some significant way. It just means everything. And then it's like, okay, well, now I want to see where this new relationship between these characters go. Like, and that's just one aspect of the game. There's not like, we're not even talking about gameplay or anything like that, which I think is just an easy win for them.
Right,
because
yeah.
all they just need to do is just make everything better. As long as they keep the relationships, I think we talked about this a little bit before, but as long as those relationships stay very strong, it doesn't have to be all or nothing on that. Like, I would like more. But for me, it goes into that I will take away quite a lot if they can just swing the Sephiroth and Cloud relationship and make that better than it ever has been. I think even in the demo, it feels like that, which is just stuff that we've already seen, like the old stuff. Meaning like Sephiroth acting as this hero to Cloud. Cloud's strife is in Nibelheim, fighting alongside Sephiroth. That whole sequence and how that's all played and seeing that relationship between them is so masterful. It's such masterful dancing around of like the mystery, but also revealing so much about Sephiroth's character at the same time without overshadowing the Nibelheim itself. It's all played to its like fullest ability. There's a scene where like he swats the Materia Keeper away from Cloud and in that demo, and just seeing him for a moment be terrifying. Like it's like, oh, he's been holding back this entire time, and this has all been a playground, like messing around for like 8-year-olds. And then he steps in, he swats the thing away like it's nothing, and he's like, oh yeah, you can now go finish this off if you'd like let me make you feel like a hero. He's handing this moment to him on a silver plate, and it's obviously very like careful. He's being very careful with Cloud, and also very mindful, but mindful in a way where it's like, if this is his life. This is Sephiroth's life that we're like watching, is he's so careful of everything, and he has to be this hero, and it's like, no wonder this guy snaps. It's so much more than you get from the original, but absolutely built 100% off of the backbone of the relationship that the OG created. So again, just more of just the good stuff is what I feel like comes from these sorts of works, where this reimagining is both a self-examination of what already exists that's good, but while also building an entire new arsenal of themes and growing into something more, which is like, look, like Resident Evil 1, really good graphics. The remake is amazing looking. I will not play Resident Evil 1 ever without going to the GameCube version first. Maybe as like a window. But now I just get Final Fantasy OG and Final Fantasy VII Retrilogy. Like, that's
Right.
how it feels to me. Is it's like
Right.
now I have two more things that I really enjoy. And it's the same thing with RE2 Remake. Is that, look, I love myself some tank controls, and
Yeah.
there's an aesthetic of that PS1 era that I will never let go. So I'm gonna go back and play RE2. But is RE2 Remake like bad for that reason? No, they just feel like separate games to me. They follow the same structure. Pretty much, they just feel different. So there's just more to love about a series that I already love. So
Right.
that's sort of, I know that I ranted for like
No, you're good. That's why you're the guest,
100
man.
years.
One thing I think about a lot too is that have we really had a sublimely, incredibly narrative focused game like Final Fantasy VII get a remake? And I'm trying to think, and I'm like, the closest thing that we even have right now is maybe Persona 3 Reload next year, right? But for the most part, I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, man, a lot of the remakes that have happened over the past like decade in gaming haven't really been narratively focused games, right? It's mostly just been gameplay focused games. So I'm really curious to see how this will affect the future of narrative or games that are narrative focused getting remakes. That is going to be incredibly fascinating to see what they do with that, right?
I think you're actually making a point that I hadn't thought of recently, but this has been like an ongoing discussion in gaming in general, which is that narrative structure along with like gameplay, and like which one of these or them merged together is what usually makes like this well-rounded experience, or that's what people seem to be wanting to develop nowadays, is having both of these things. But to see like one going off in this weirder direction.
Yeah,
it is
exactly.
fascinating.
Right.
It's very interesting point to make.
Right. So it's going to be really fascinating to see how this impacts the future of other video game remakes. And they are doing some pretty risky things here in terms of their subversion. Primarily, it seems like there's a lot of interesting things that are happening with Zack and Aerith, which kind of brings me to a topic that I've been wanting to talk about with you for quite some time. Developers have been talking a lot lately. A lot. Some say they've been talking perhaps a little too much. Recently, they doubled down again on this being a fairly faithful remake, and in the same breath, they talked about how players will never see what's coming. On a surface level, this seems contradictory, but what's your reconciliation of this?
I have reconciled. So I have not paid this close to any game's development as it's happening, except for like maybe a few others, but not as obsessively. And also because this is sort of like a content creator's job is to stay on top of these things. So I think what happened at some point in the last 3 years is that I went completely mad. I think I was just honest to God sick of hearing about the game. And I think this is what broke, and I didn't realize that I thought I was alone on this, but until these last few little like drops from Katase and like just the development team in general had kind of come out, did I realize that everybody felt the same way. That everyone has been too saturated with Rebirth news. And I think it started off with the fact that they have waited till this moment to sort of start heavily campaigning for the game. Like we had nothing, and then we had like this amazing trailer that was filled with like everything that anybody could have wanted. And now just they won't shut up until this game is out, which I'm totally fine with. They're marketing the game. That is exactly what they should be doing. I think the reason why people feel like this is people are feeling a little stir crazy, and why I think I felt the way that I felt, which I no longer feel. I'm actually way more relaxed about what they're saying. At first, it threw me into like, what do they mean? What could this all add up to? What will this mean when the game is out and we look back on these quotes? It actually was really interesting because I feel like now that I've spent 3 years with this game and having been watching it so closely, I was like, oh, there's a pattern here. There's a pattern of how they've been talking about Remake since the announcement of Remake back in 2015. Oh, Jesus Christ. Where they said that the game wasn't going to be like radically different when Remake was coming out. And then the game came out and it was radically different. And I now am looking at Rebirth and they're like, things are not going to be radically different. But like, they're also maybe going to be some new stuff in there. And their sort of rationale for what is the same as and new is the same, you know, as it was back when Remake was coming out. So I can't trust a single word of what they're saying. So at this point, my reconciliation is just to not believe anything that is being said and then just very patiently waiting to see what the game will be when it comes out. Because I really don't think that, I think that they're setting people up for the same disappointment that they set people up for Remake, which is that they thought that it was going to be the same game and it ended up being this huge other thing. My own personal opinion about it is that I feel like the game will be different. And I think that regardless of what is being said by Kitase or anything like that and trying to quell like the fears of difference is actually I don't know why they're saying it, but I genuinely feel like in my bones that there are going to be moments where people are like, that is in no way, shape or form the same. And that ruins the illusion of this thing being what it wants, what people want it to be. But I also feel in my core that there is a lot of like that remake syndrome that we were just talking about, where it all feels evolutionary, not like a repeat. So I think as long as they're evolving the themes of the original, going in this new direction won't be so bad. However, we are talking about the greatest game of all time in a lot of people's perspective, and there's a lot of ways that you can just fuck that up.
Yeah. So, and a story that's revered as one of the greatest video games has ever told.
Right. So adding something additional and not just a revision or like an expansion is a dangerous game to play. And I think, and this is sort of what I was thinking about when I was talking to you about 16, is that, and why I was asking whether or not the gameplay that was sort of like bleh was like at least interesting bleh, is as long as this crazy ride that we're on ends up being just a stroke that ends up being in the wrong direction, I just want it to be a committed brushstroke.
Exactly.
Of whatever it is. I don't want you to hesitate for a moment that like, oh yeah, like this is like Cloud 2 comes in with like 2 Buster Swords and is like dressed like Advent children and like ruins the whole game. But like you can look at it and be like, you have to have been some sort of deranged either madman or genius to try and accomplish whatever this is. And like, I want to be talking about what the new stuff is as much as I like talking about the old stuff for whatever reason.
Exactly. No, yes. I mean, because I have people ask me all the time, even though, you know, I've said this like a trillion times, I've never been one who was like a huge proponent of it being a 1-to-1. I was just kind of nervous about the way that they were approaching doing it differently, right? But a lot of people have asked me how I would feel if they dialed it back and sort of reconciled it back into kind of like a 1-for-1. It's not that significantly different going forward. And I tell people, I would hate that. I would think that sucks. You did all of this, and it's just to like get back to the same point. In the same things.
There's a really good movie example of this of this in recent media, which I think is actually like the new Star Wars trilogy, which is you had like the basic remake, which is the beginning, the requel, which is the first one. The second one, which is so upsetting to a lot of people when it came out at the time, because it was just taking so many liberties and going in a really not like direction that anybody thought it would, and for like a lot of reasons it was playing around with that. And then the third took all of what was introduced in the second that was new and then just shoved it under the water to drown it and be like, no, everything's the same, this is going to be the retelling of this thing in a requel sort of fashion, and like let's just get rid of anything that was new that was introduced. And I gotta tell you, it was the most boring fucking thing that I could have ever have seen them doing, because they had done such an interesting new thing with some of the characters that I wanted to see completed. But to half-ass pull the plug halfway through is such a letdown, because you don't even, now not only do you just get nothing, you get nothing of substantial weight, you also are cheated out of seeing what could have been something amazing or horrible or both. But the fact that you didn't trust the audience to accept what the path was is actually probably like the worst thing that you can do as like a creative, is not just give the audience everything that you want to give them. It's like, don't give me a half-assed vision. Give me your full vision, and I will tell you straight up, the audience will be as frank and unbiased as possible if something is good or bad. Like, at least if for, most of the audience.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
It is that resonating feeling that you're just, you could have made something really great, but instead you decided to backpedal. And Remake and the Rebirth and whatever the third one is can't backpedal. And I really hope that they do just commit. I know that there has been a lot of people being like, I want the full OG thing, or people that really want them to lean in. I just say go for it. Just go for it. And also with gameplay and everything like that, it does feel like there is that sort of playfulness to it with the way that they're playing with the areas, with materia, with combat, where it's just like, we're just embarrassing you with the amount of stuff that you're going to be able to do in this game, and you're going to just want to keep playing it. I feel like even the world is constructed like that, with like a lot of like the lore stuff or the intrigue that they're trying to bring to each area, and like even like the like merchants, like shops are insanely detailed and really fun to look at from my perspective. There's just so much, and I just hope that they don't. I want them to just go crazy with the story. I don't mind at this point, because it's all going to be fun, it feels like. So
no, yeah, I completely agree. There's nothing worse, I think, than dialing back. I noticed an interesting chat message here from Carrot Whiskey, who asks, I'm curious how the domestic audience back in Japan is viewing. So one thing about me is that since I'm studying Japanese, like one of the ways in which I do it is I actually read like a lot of Japanese FF discourse. And
that's neat.
What may actually surprise you is that it is not profoundly different than the discourse here. Like, you have about the same distribution of opinions, I would say, from reading it. You have, a lot of people who are very excited, some people who are nervous. You have your purists, you have your people who love what's happening. It's about the same. It's actually not too profoundly different, which is interesting, because, there's a lot of people who like to depict it, one way or the other, but for the most part, it's not that different. The comment sections, to me, kind of read about the same, plus or minus, as they would here. So yeah, it's not as different as people would probably think.
It definitely doesn't. I do think that like there may be a perception that like they're a little bit more open to it, just because there is a lot of media that is being created in Japan that is sort of like this reboot sort of fashion is very popular, maybe, and a growing sort of fascination with other developers, which is great. But I definitely see like the same apprehension, like just without having read any of it. It's like you have people who are accepting of new direction, and you're always going to have people who are less, a lot more hesitant. So any creative decision like that feels like it would be met with some sort of like controversy or discussion, which is also like kind of its advantage at the same time, is that it just gets people naturally to start talking about it endlessly for as long as the media exists in like the public eye. So
Right.
I do think that it is going to be really funny to look back on all of this though at some point and see like
Hilarious.
was it yes, hilarious, and just seeing like everybody like either tearing their hair out for one reason or the other, or being like way too blindly accepting. I do think though, like even with like I do think that there's some like regular levels of apprehension that already exist like within Remake. Like there are swings that Remake takes already that are really good, and then there's some where you're like, I think maybe they are very hyper fixated on a feeling rather than maybe slowing down. Is that's sort of the feeling that I get with the re trilogy's energy is that it is just propelling forward explosively.
Yeah.
And there are moments in Remake where it's like you would really like them to slow down. Like even in the DLC, there's a moment where I really don't like this moment, but Sonon's death is like every AAA or like big budget media movie where the side character dies that is supposed to mean something to everybody, and it's overplayed and it sucks. It's just not. It just is not, and also it's not even a death, as somebody's a mention in the comments, which is another
it's
bias.
So funny too, because like I took one look at him, like one look, and I was like, he dies, and they made him exceptionally handsome, so that you feel even worse when he dies.
Tragic backstory, got it. All right, you're
Yep.
going, and the end of this demo.
Yeah. And I know he's not dead. He's probably not dead. He's probably going to appear again.
He's a Nero ghost now.
Yeah.
So you get to see him at some point for some reason.
Yeah.
I think that these are those moments though. Like even if he didn't survive or get pulled into the near darkness, you could have still had that. I think, and not been. I don't know. They get very captured in these. I want to call them the Hobbit-esque moments, where something that isn't a big deal is cinematically presented as the fate of the world hangs in the balance, and your audience is so disconnected from that moment. So I really hope that, and I actually expect it going forward, that moments that people really want to be subtle, like maybe even like, and I hate to say this and like shoot myself in the foot, but like Aerith's death, which is very like eloquently like shown. I am almost guaranteeing a misstep on that, only because it is such a subtle moment, and Remake has not yet proven to me that they can handle doing things in that way yet.
Right, the subtle.
The subtle drama of it, a death or something profoundly impactful to characters, showing it in silence or in like a more graceful way. They can do certain things really well. They showed like the playfulness between like Sephiroth and Cloud, like banter and the mystery they handle very well. They're not fucking around with that, and it seems like that's where their focus is. But I think it's that dialed in aspect of it where they're being too careful, which is what might ruin some of those like more those moments that need breathing, because they're just looking at everything from like zeros and ones and like, and also emotional, and it's like they're trying to balance it. It's like no, just kind of like let it go. We'll see though. That is my fear though, just generally. And I know that you've had misgivings about even like Platefall in the past, and notoriously so in its own way.
Yeah.
But for very good reason, I think, because that's another moment where you, like in the OG, where it's like no music and just the sound of like the plate falling and watching it happen live on TV, like the TV signal cutting out.
Yeah.
All of these like really brilliant silent moments. Then like the upper class, music,
Right.
the fucking classical music,
Yeah.
which people could see it as like overplaying the hand there, but no, it's fucked up. It's haunting. He's like,
and the cinematography,
yes, it's so good.
The shot from behind President Shinra, I love so much more than the shot from the front of him, right? Because you see the shot of the front of him, he's like smirking, and I'm like, dude, this is comically evil. Right?
Yeah, this is too much.
Right. I don't actually kind of like want to know. Like, I feel like it actually is better to like not know what his facial expression is in that moment, and for you to kind of like read it in your mind. That and then also too, and the music was like
yeah, it's like, this is not what's happening. This is maybe like the moment before, not after. It's like, it just keeps building in climax to just not be. And then you see Wedge with like the whispers around him and his cats.
Yeah. And look, one of my favorite shots actually from the OG is you can kind of see there's just like this guy looking up. And the plate, he sees the plate coming down, and obviously they don't show him being crushed, but it's just that implication that he's looking up and it's coming down, and
it's over. It's over for this dude.
Yeah,
like he's accepting that, and there's some people running around him.
Yeah,
like to try and get away, but he's just like looking up. Yeah, no, I know exactly what moment you're talking about.
I was I was very surprised with Marl when Marl didn't die.
There's a lot of people who didn't.
I was like, I thought that like the moment I saw her, I was like, oh my god, they're gonna like crush this old lady in the fucking plate collapse, and it's gonna be like the most devastating thing I've ever seen, and it's gonna like destroy me. But then actually,
that would have been a good person to get rid of if you're being like, that's what are the side characters that you have spent enough time with, where like using her in that moment to play to that like sort of tragedy, that would have been great.
Because I mean,
totally on board with that.
Right, because in an evacuation scene like that, right, like who would be most likely to get left behind or to be in, so like people who are less able to get away in such a fast enough time, that being like older people, for example. And so the tragedy in that for me would have been enhanced quite greatly. I know some people are like, that's morbid, but yeah.
They're gonna use her death for the whatever their when the party returns to Midgar. That's what they're waiting for. I'm imagining some larger build up to this character's death for no reason.
That could still be really good. And so speaking of building up to death,
I know nothing about what you're talking about. There's no death or loss in this game.
Speaking of building up to death, it seems like there's quite the conundrum here with a certain flower girl. On one hand, if she dies, one might ask, what's the ultimate purpose of defying her destiny? If she still lives, it might feel like the central theme of grief is lost. In your opinion, with everything you know of the story thus far, and of FF7 in total as a story, what do you think is the best way to navigate this?
So I think there's, from the perspective that we have now currently, I don't think that the way that would play out, like with Destiny completely gone, playing this out where she also dies, would be very resonating to a lot of people. I sort of came to the conclusion that, like, at some point that I feel naturally in my gut that she will die again. There's an entire video that I made about like why I think that is. I think like maybe like the video right after I finished my Structure of 5. I haven't seen that in a while, but the same sort of message of it kind of still stands, where I feel like it is tragic to sort of have this character go through all of this, try and sort of, get the upper hand on like what her fate is, to just die after that. But I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think in tandem with some of the more recent things that have been said about like the Whispers and sort of what I'm expecting now, I think that there's a better sort of workaround to it. I don't know how you feel about it, but I've even said this on the last time that we talked. I genuinely think that the Whispers will return in the game. I think I was convinced of that not too long ago, just with like some of the dialogue that has been coming out of like the developers saying that like the first thing that was said about the Whispers after Remake came out was that they were torn apart from Destiny or whatever. They were ripped apart, something to that effect. And you're like, okay, well that sounds bad, because that sounds like that means that they're coming back. And then more recently they're saying they're going to return, and that they also play a similar role to like what Zack now plays. And there's a whole bunch of stuff they've been saying about that, which pretty much confirms that they will be coming back. I do think that my perspective of it is that Aerith's death is not the thing that needs subversion, or what her initial plan is. I think that's what ultimately will make, if she does die again, mean not more, but like will not hurt her death. I think if Aerith went back in time not to save herself, but to save her friends, or do something to create the catalyst to give her friends the upper hand, regardless of whether or not she'll be able to survive or not, like maybe that moment is not changeable. But if she can do something to give them more of a leg up, then that will be, I think, okay. I think the ultimate reason why we think that there's a chance that she'll survive is because Cloud is being set up to think that he does have the power of saving her, because that's the thought that Sephiroth puts in his head, which is the thought that he's using to fuck with him. And this has been sort of the buildup of why I'm so fixated on the relationship between Sephiroth and Cloud, and how it feels like an evolution of that relationship, is because Sephiroth is not just fucking with Cloud's sense of self, he's fucking with the deepest parts of what makes Cloud strong later. And he's trying to crush him in a way that is so much more impactful than anything he did in the original game, that it will make him almost maybe subservient to like what he wants of Cloud, to a way that like he can't bounce back from. So I feel like they're setting up for, and they've done this by saying, it's like the very first line out of Sephiroth's mouth after trying to convince Cloud to run away from death, which is the Nibelheim mixture of Midgardine, which is another huge aspect of the compilation that I talk about in my most recent video, is that like Sephiroth is trying to convince Cloud that death is a bad thing, and that he should run away from it and not face it. And that mentality is obviously terrible and very key to the theme of loss that is sort of learned like at the end, is that you have to sort of be open to like, whatever that kind of brings, and learning about it, and also experiencing it, and then, overcoming, certain feelings or whatever. He's like, you have to run away from that experience. And then Cloud's like, okay. And then he sees Aerith, and the very first thing out of Sephiroth's mouth is, you're too weak to save her. And he's telling him this also in the same breath, saying like, you need to run away from the experience of death. So just like that alone, and then coupled with what we've been seeing with Rebirth and what he's trying to do with Tifa's character, where it's like he's trying to create distrust in that relationship. Sephiroth is just taking every single relationship that Cloud has and is just trying to sever it enough to make it so that when things do go wrong and things don't go the way that they're supposed to go, Cloud will not be able to cope. And that to me is like, okay, like taking out whispers, taking out like time travel or whatever, it really feels like if they hit on that note singularly, that will be sort of not worth the whole trouble of creating this weird timeline experience or whatever. But it feels like that to me is opening up an area of exploration for the characters that feels like I'm willing to go there to see what that looks like. I want to see what Cloud looks like at that point. I want to see what Sephiroth continues to do. I want to see like Tifa's heartbreak, like watching like Cloud grow more. This is my favorite part about what they've shown off so far for Rebirth, is the fact that you have them preaching synergy as like this like togetherness mechanic, like that this is the bond that is, they're strengthening their bond. And I'm just like thinking about midway through this game, we're gonna feel like the amount of distrust building with the party to Cloud is going to be so prominent, because he's like losing his shit in like this doctor's office in the trailer. And you're like, if this guy's going to be acting like this throughout the entire journey of Rebirth, they're not going to trust him. They're going to start. That was always my least favorite part of the original game, is like how they're just following blindly this guy who is so clearly unhinged.
Yeah.
Where they're like, oh yeah, well, we'll just willfully ignore this like weird episode that you're having like in front of like even in the Temple of the Ancients, and like after what happens with Aerith, it's like no one would follow this dude after this, like, or trust him enough. Like you would have to have some other motivator pushing the characters to go follow this dude. So I think what Rebirth is doing is that they realize consciously, it's like, no one's going to follow this dude at a certain point, because the realistic factors here are he is not to be trusted, and they shouldn't. Like even I wouldn't follow him. Logically, no one would follow this dude.
Yeah.
So let's sever the Tifa thing. Let's put more strain on Tifa's relationship with Cloud. Let's put more strain on Aerith's relationship with Cloud. Let's fuck with like, because Barrett will probably be the catalyst to like, because he's a little bit more explosive, to start poking holes.
Yeah, for sure.
Cloud, and being like, well, that's not fucking right. Like what you just said there is bullshit. Or like, what are you doing? Like, there's a moment in the original remake where I think they're about to fight the Airbuster, and Cloud disconnects for a second because he hears like something that Tifa says, and he goes somewhere else, and Barrett shouts at him, it's like, we're counting on you, like we need you like in the game right now. There's gonna be a moment in Rebirth where that same moment happens with Barrett and Cloud, and they're just not gonna, he's gonna start not trusting him. And then you're gonna start hearing all of this dialogue about this witty banter that we've been hearing, that we all love in Remake and that we've been seeing in Rebirth. We're gonna start seeing the seeds be sown of their disconnection, and in battle maybe they start not being so like nice to each other, or they're like, you know, faltering. That journey in itself, and as a gameplay mechanic, if they use that in that way, I would be so excited. Yeah. Just to see it break down from a gameplay perspective, to see the relationships that I care about break down in a more emotional narrative way, I'll be super excited.
Fat Music here has an incredibly interesting chat message for us. He says, "Oh damn, interesting. The synergy gameplay mechanic could be ripped away when everything inevitably falls apart at the end of Rebirth. That'd be a great way to implement storytelling through gameplay mechanics, just like OG7 did." Yeah, that would go hard for me, right? So, like if Cloud in particular, you know, the distrust like makes him lose the ability to do synergy attacks, that would go incredibly hard for me.
Yes, I actually completely agree. And I also feel like that builds a lot up to what they were talking about with the third game, which is that they also want to take another leap forward and sort of remake the mechanics of that game and expand upon it and make it deeper. Is the way that the third game will introduce these mechanics is like maybe that those bonds regrowing together, and the way that, because in this demo, the Nibelheim incident feels very much like the demo for the rest of the game. So it's like, of course, Zack and Sephiroth's relationship, they're going to have synergy. But like to see like maybe the band broken up and then being regathered in the third game, and then reintroducing synergy as like the last new mechanic, or like in sort of like the introductory area of the third game, would be, you're like, oh my god, like I feel like I can actually do this. I can go like stop a giant meteor or something like that. It'd be very impactful / empowering in that moment. But to see all be they have to do a really good job of actually stripping away all of these foundations in Rebirth. That being said, to answer your question, I do think that Aerith will die. I think Zack's role is also sort of muddied in that, and with the Whisper discussion. So I also do think that the Whispers will be back. I think that Aerith's role is to subvert something else, not her death. And I think once that's clear to us, like her death won't be like necessarily underplayed, but like won't be the fixation of the overall image of it. Will be impactful, but not it will be a part of a bigger mystery of what needs to happen with the characters after this moment.
Yeah, only a single pepperoni on a larger pizza.
I love the pizza reference for this particular game, dude. Only a Domino's pizza, perhaps.
Yeah. So my stance on it has kind of been that at the very least, I've always thought that the scene in which she dies will be recreated, because it's one of the most iconic scenes in video games, and it's one of the scenes that kind of gave these guys their careers. And so there is no way in which the scene, at the very least, where Aerith dies, will not be recreated. That is just like, it explicitly is going to happen. The question to me has always been the finality of her death, and not whether she experiences death in this remake, because she is
I get what you're saying.
Right. And so whether there'll be like a lightning returns moment at the end where you guys know, or like Sarah like opts out of like 13's like live stream or whatever, and
No, I don't, but that's
she's just fine again, even though she just died in 13 too. She's okay. And then oh man, I mean, like the ending of that game retconned everything so hard. It was like, because you never played 13, right?
No, I have not. I know nothing about it either, so
it was like tragic too, because like in the first 13 there's this kid named Hope, and like his parents dies. But if you read like the novels and stuff after the end of 13, because everyone got reborn into the new world, his parents are just alive again. And
what?
Yeah, his mom just comes back. Yeah.
Oh.
His dad never died, but like, yeah, his mom comes back to life, and
That's
everyone,
sick.
Everyone's reincarnated, and they get to live in France.
What?
Yeah, I'm not making this up. I know it sounds like an oversimplification, but this is really what happens. Like, it's not this is really what happens, like, for real. So yeah, everyone. Yeah.
I don't know. In context, I'm excited to see what you're talking about. Even though there is context. Paris, cool. That's sick.
Anyway,
that's so weird, dude.
I just hope it's not something weird. Like, I mean, obviously, I don't think Cloud is gonna live in France by the end of Final Fantasy VII Revenge, but I that name would go hard for part 3, right?
Listen, I'm in. If it's Return, then, and the Return of the Jedi vibes come in, then I think we're gonna be in a lot of trouble too. Every single name I've heard of it yet, first of all, said with such conviction, which makes it like that much better. At this point, it could be named anything, and I'd just be like, sure.
my top 2 names are Reincarnate and Revenge.
Revenge is a sick one. That goes in an opposite direction that I was expecting. So.
Right. Especially if Aerith does die at the end, and that really is a thing. The mood. especially that the player will feel. I think
for sure.
Revenge would actually be pretty suitable for part 3.
You're gonna have the Skywalker Darth Vader moment where he's like, "Oh, I'm like trying to kill you out of revenge." For this death, or for all the stuff that you've done. I do feel like that's also the prime motivator that Sephiroth is instilling into Cloud. So I would really like that to continue forward. There's so much that they've built up to with like the emotional sort of presence of like hatred, which is this is very like Star Wars. I know people hate fucking using that as a reference, but it's like the hatred and then like love and acceptance and guidance, whereas like Destiny is more on like the hatred / jealousy, all of these negative emotions. Right. Sephiroth is really hammering in Remake all of like these really negative feelings in Cloud. I really do want to see that like fully fleshed out going forward. Like I kind of want to see Cloud just turn into like the biggest asshole that he could possibly be, and like not be nice to his friends or like, you know, accommodating. Like I want to see that sort of like part of Cloud that we know he becomes sort of slip away for a bit, so that when his redemption hopefully eventually arrives, like we can really feel like that sort of growth with that character. And it'll also probably be more resonating with him finding himself and all these other things. There's so much good that they could do with that relation, that character, and like his sort of like linchpin. They have linchpinned like his relationship to be the most important in like all of the universe. So it's like at some point they're gonna have to capitalize on that and really make us care about that too. So very exciting stuff. I don't know if where was I going with this? I was gonna say something else, but I think it left me already. So
all right, so one more question and then we're gonna take some chat questions. So chat, go ahead and start thinking of your questions. Try to highlight them if you could, so that makes it a little bit easier for me to pick them out. Or you can @ me or @ Sleepezi as well. What do you think it will be the role of the Arbiters in Rebirth?
So that actually was something I wanted to talk about. That's where I was going to go, which is that it is the torn apart aspect makes me feel like the separation between Destiny and... I'm like super shortening this. There's a ton of developer commentary. This is something I really would like to make a video about before the next trailer comes out. But the idea is that the Whispers have only been temporarily separated, I think, from the sort of timeline or whatever you want to look at it as, the path that we're on. So right now, I feel like the party does have some agency to manipulate the story in a way that is going to be impactful. But I do think that what will happen is that at some point, the Arbiters will regain control over the events of the story, and whatever matters to sort of the like sort of 7 seconds thing has to happen in this window of time for Rebirth. And if something doesn't happen in that time, it won't influence sort of the end result of the game. But I obviously think that it will happen. Like something severely different will happen in Rebirth. And then once the Arbiters sort of regain control, it's like, okay, that moment in time no longer exists where you could have influenced the events. And that's where the all hope is lost feeling kind of comes in for the party. But who knows? I could be totally wrong about that. The other working theory is that Sephiroth just still has control over the Whispers as he did in the Singularity, and is like just using them in the same way. But I really do think that I don't know if it's going to be Aerith's death. Maybe it's something more impactful with like Tifa's character or something else like that, where that moment, that 7 seconds thing comes in. But I don't know.
Right. And because this is a trilogy too, part 2 in particular, more than any other part, has to end on a massive loss. We have to feel like hope is gone. Everything is not okay. And obviously the setup for that, part of which is Aerith's death scene. But then also too, like, I feel like they're going to try to amplify that feeling of loss in some way and make us feel like there's a bigger mystery going on. And that probably will tie into Zack somehow.
I do think that that's the thing, because people thought that, like, because in my last video, I also allude to the fact that I think Tifa will be the target of, like, Sephiroth more so than, like, because I think Aerith will die. I think that will be the anticipated thing, but then the growing mystery will be like, well, is Tifa also on the chopping block? Now, whether or not they actually do anything with that character, I understand the sort of inner workings of removing Tifa's character from, like, the path of the story is monumental. Like, it's not to be fucked with, and people don't want it to be fucked with. I think to threaten that, though, and to make it seem like she is disconnected will be the threat that we feel in Rebirth. Because it is something very... The characters that are the most valuable to Cloud from a... like the literal threads of the lore and the life stream and just the story itself and the narrative is Zack, Sephiroth, Aerith, and Tifa. And all of these characters are being very prominently marketed in marketing material, having, like, their destiny severed, whatever, with, like, the poster that they're, like, in, there's, like, two different worlds, and, like, Sephiroth is the catalyst of it. The point is to say that these characters' fates are intentionally supposed to be obscured to us. So they will continue to press into that. And I do think that what will probably happen by the end of Rebirth is that Tifa's fate will be uncertain. And that will be the lead-in to the third game. And that's when they're really going to have everybody screaming at them.
Yeah.
And the shouting will not be able to be deafened. It will be really bad. But I think all intentionally just to keep people on their toes. I don't think that they're actually going to kill her. I just think that they want to create that uncertainty.
Yeah, for sure. That makes perfect sense to me. It's a great way to keep people talking, because they say that this ending to Rebirth is going to have people talking even more than remakes, right? And if it only ends with Aerith dying, there's no way that it's going to keep, because that's like the most predictable thing possible, right? Like, that's the thing that So if they are planning to keep everyone talking for years until part 3, then I think kind of like toying with Tifa's fate could also really spark that conversation. But I completely agree. I absolutely don't think anything is going to necessarily bad happen to her, not in that way. So I think she'll be fine. But they want to make you get invested.
Have you seen Neon Genesis, the Rebuild series?
Yeah, of course.
So what would you feel like if they had, like, a Rey moment in, like, the 2.0 for, like, Rebirth or Remake, where the character, like, pulls somebody out of literal death to, like, save them in, like, this really, like, fantastical, also, like, that's not supposed to happen sort of way.
Yeah. I don't know.
Because to me, in that moment in the anime, when I was watching it, I was just like, sorry, spoilers. But the point is just to say that it was so monumental to see this character do something so abruptly and also so chaotically to, like, everything that we knew about the story. You're just like, what is about to happen? Like, if he even accomplishes this, because the world is, like, completely falling apart to make this happen. And that's how I feel a lot about, like, Cloud in general, is that they, like, if like it or not, I guess, to anybody who may not know, like, anything about, like, memories or, like, the importance of these things, or, like, Cloud's character and how he's, like, you know, the I don't know what you want to call him, like, just the whole connector of, like, how the world functions in some way in time. They've made his role pivotal. So to have him do something like that would probably both not only affect, like, just the way that the story plays out, but just, like, the fabric of the story itself. So or like the universe of Final Fantasy VII, which is why like at the end when they're looking at these two universes, it's like, yeah, we're about to like decide like the fate of like both of these things that we don't know what they are. And it feels like it's building up to that kind of moment where Cloud does some crazy thing. I think it would actually be pretty exciting, and maybe if they tie it in emotionally somehow like they did in Genesis, it would probably be people would probably talk about that.
Yeah, I'm not principally against anything happening. Just gonna depend really on how they ultimately execute it and what the thematic meaning is, because ultimately I still don't actually know what Remake story is really about yet.
Yeah, and that's sort of how I feel about it too. It feels very vague now all of a sudden.
Like people say, like, you know, even asking me like what final, like, should Aerith die, for example. I don't know what the story of this trilogy is even about yet to say, like, if it makes sense thematically for her to die. I don't know.
No, for sure.
Yeah, I actually like really need to, like, I don't even think I can say that until like after like the third part's been out. And then I can look back and be like, yeah, that made sense for like the themes that they were going for. Like, for example, if defying destiny is like really the big thing here, then I would say then my point would probably be like, no, she shouldn't die, right? But on the other hand, if the theme actually really turns out to be how immutable destiny is, right? Like, because they kind of tease that, like, you know, how there may be certain things that cannot be changed no matter what, then yeah, she needs to die. So I don't know which one of those things that they're actually leaning into to say like, oh, they need to do this, because it kind of depends on what kind of story that they're trying to tell, and I still don't actually know what that is yet.
I think you hit on something, and this is something that I think BabySeal was also referring to when we were talking about like Aerith and like sort of our fixation on that as like an audience. I think that those two things are the things. So I think that they're gonna really overuse Aerith's death. From my own perspective, like I think that like it's gonna be like one of the first things that we see like Cloud having like maybe like flashes to, or he's just gonna continue having the flashes that he's had from Remake carrying over into Rebirth about this thing happening. And I think because all of us are asking that question, obviously there's something else that's probably going to go on, and this is just our fixation for now. I also feel the same way about Destiny in a lot of ways, where it's like, this is not none of these things feel like the core of they're very integral to the story, but it doesn't feel like the thing yet, because we haven't gotten to that thing yet, as you're saying. So I think in Rebirth, hopefully it will be very clear what kind of story they're telling. They better.
Right. Yeah.
But I definitely think that while Aerith and Destiny will probably play a very integral role in telling that story, I don't think it's going to be about those moments specifically. I think that there will be tools to get to those moments.
For sure. I think we got some good questions here that I wanna pick from, just because it's a hot topic, and this comes from Subtext. What are your guys' thoughts on how they're exploring these additional dimensions of Sephiroth, and for some, a potential redemption arc? I'll just say offhand, if it really is, you know, multiverses that we're dealing with, and naturally there'll be multiple versions of each character, I think that it might make sense that one of those Sephiroths potentially could want some type of redemption, but I don't think that Sephiroth being redeemed is on the table, specifically because they've already said explicitly and just recently that Sephiroth is the ultimate evil of Final Fantasy VII. Nobody will top him. Nothing comes close. And so I think they're gonna keep Sephiroth as the biggest baddie, and yeah, there may be a good Sephiroth in like some other dimension, sure, if that's really the route that we're going, but ultimately Sephiroth will still be the big bad.
I completely agree. I don't think that the redemption. I do think that all of the additional lore that they've sort of been like adding to his story in terms of like the Ever Crisis chapter, I feel like is so impactful for all of the reasons why it isn't a redemption arc. Meaning that they are fleshing out sort of the psychology of Sephiroth to a point as to show us why this character is the way that he is, so that when he eventually becomes the character that we know him to be, we understand his motivations. The other thing too that we have to keep in mind, or at least that I'm trying to keep in mind going forward, is that the use of Ore Sephiroth in Remake also means, for long story short to me, a more humanized Sephiroth, which means that we now have to understand Sephiroth not as this Genova sort of driven, like, you know, we are like a collective and we are like collectively the symbolic evil. It's more like now Sephiroth has a personal motivation or personal drive to now become or do this to the world in a way that we maybe can relate to or understand, maybe, or not relate to, but just be more open-minded to, and maybe fleshes that character out in a way that we haven't seen him before. I think that would be a really interesting way to take the character, and I think that that's what a lot of this extra lore is doing, because it's like talking about a lot of like the life stream's ideals in Ever Crisis, and he's coming up to these essentially like people that are Cetra, and talking to him about like spirituality and like what's the point of like death, and like how can you guys like face this and like not, you know, and be okay with it. Things that Sephiroth, again, all of these talking points of death and like acceptance of it or avoiding it are like super prominent. These are all just pillars of this character being built up into that person who's like trying to not only get Cloud to resist it, but also thrives off of resisting death, which is a lot of how Sephiroth is able to sort of go on into the live stream and, you know, the expanded media, like On the Way to a Smile. I think it's really also being masterfully done. It doesn't feel like just thrown together. It doesn't feel like this part of Sephiroth's story is meaningless or tacked on. It feels very much in line with what they've been doing to all of the characters so far. So I don't think redemption. I think just a bigger, badder villain. That's what all of this stuff points to. So
I completely agree. Another one from Subsex, which is also a really good one. What themes do you want them to focus on, and how do you feel about the theme of fate/destiny the devs have discussed? Personally, I've already kind of talked about this at length. My only thing about with fate and destiny and how it's being used here in FF7 Remake is that I kind of feel like in the original Final Fantasy VII, what actually made it stand out is that it avoided kind of the most overused JRPG trope, which is fate and destiny. And now they are using that trope here. And I just feel like from the perspective of the game as a JRPG, it's fairly tiring from my perspective. I can put on pretty much any JRPG and get some type of story that heavily uses the same concepts about fate and destiny. And I feel like a lot of them are better done in what they're conceptually trying to do than this game, and are a lot more interesting. I also think that there's other games in general that aren't even necessarily JRPGs that also handle fate and destiny a lot more interesting than, say, what this is necessarily trying to do. God of War, for example. So, yeah, to me, it's very bland, unseasoned chicken. That aspect of it. But I know for a lot of people, it's a huge point of intrigue. So I'm not knocking it per se, but that's just how it feels for me. You can take it.
I think you're totally right in the fact that it is something that it's like sci-fi using like robot artificial intelligence to explore like human consciousness. It's a trope of like, okay, this is just a pillar to talk about X, Y, and Z, and that's why this is like a part of the story. I do feel like a lot of things that I am more interested in, even if it is being sort of utilized in sort of maybe a like cliche way, is the fact that characters can be, they've pinpointed on the middle ground being the place of the exploration of the story to a degree of Rebirth. I think just with like Remake, because they're always talking about like the white and the black and white aspect of the story. But as you kind of go through it, they start like seeing it's like, oh, there's like a ton of people at Shinra that are, you know, just people. Like they just have like 9-to-5 jobs. And like they aren't like, are they also to be like sort of painted as like these like terrible people, or are they also just trying to make their way like in life? Like maybe there's not so much of a separate, it's not as clean cut. But that being said, I think that's always sort of where Final Fantasy VII has operated from, where you have like these super big, larger than life things happening, and then just average people just kind of trying to handle it, like the weapons, meteor, like things that are not preventable. Like,
right.
And that, and like the life stream, and it all feels very out of the character's hands. A lot of the things, even if they do overcome it, they feel like it just sort of it's one thing after the next, and like what can possibly be done about all of this. I feel like that with Destiny like involved doesn't feel like too great of a step in that sense, because it just kind of leaves it up to like people dealing with a lot of just the questions that are left over, which again is like the cliche to like kind of force the characters to think about and think on these things. But if it's Barrett thinking on these things, if it's Cloud thinking on these things, I'm not like terribly upset, because I just enjoy the musings of these characters and like their thoughts on like what that means in tandem with all of these other things, like the life stream. Like, well, if this is like the natural course of the planet, then like why are we trying to interrupt it? Okay, well, doesn't that like conflict with Barrett's ideology of like the life stream? Like, you're trying to save this thing, which is kind of what then centers back to like what his character ultimately comes to anyways, is that this is like in a lot of ways a way of masking what happened to him. And like he was just really angry, and he was maybe like lashing out in some ways because of all of like that anger that he felt, which again plugs back into like the theme of anger and like what that does to somebody, and like how isolating that makes people. And it all feeds back into the same themes. But then the discussion, I think, is, well, then why even do that? Because eventually we're going to get to that anyway, with or without Destiny. And I do think that that is why maybe we're overplaying, maybe to some degree, the importance of its role in the story, which is also why I'm so fascinated with the idea that the Whispers maybe technically aren't that like removed from the story as much as we thought that they might be after this, to sort of reintroduce them into the context of this new world that we're sort of coming into, that Sephiroth's trying to create. Again, this comes back to like, I just want to see what they're trying to do with the story, because you really do have to plug back in, like, why bring up Destiny at all unless you're going to do something with that matters to
Precisely
what already exists. So yeah,
yeah,
I'm still like on the fence.
And that's like one thing to me that you know, I want to be clear about too, is that it can still be interesting, right? Like, right. As I mentioned, there is still media now that comes out where toying with fate and destiny can be incredibly fascinating. I just found it, you know, on surface level, as we see it right now, with them introducing it into introducing it into a story that didn't heavily rely on it before, and it was never explicitly a thing. It makes it feel like it is taking something that was already more flavored and kind of making it something that's we've already seen in a dozen pieces of media all over and over again, especially when it comes to how FF7 was differentiated from other JRPGs in particular. So
For sure.
for the next question, this is a holy crap. This is a great question. This is a great question. This is Riseto Stone 1. Who says, when it's all said and done, will Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy be a tragedy? I'm gonna say
I don't
no.
know if it was even. Yeah, I don't even think to say that the original was a tragedy in some ways.
Yeah, I don't think the original was that tragic actually by the end.
I think the idea is it's always kind of going back to what we were just talking about is that these themes of the use of the world and Final Fantasy VII, and what I love so much about it is that regardless of what the party does, at the end it all feels very out of their hands, which is why going 500 years into the future is such a big deal, and also contributes back to loss. Is like, regardless of how you feel, and this is not meant to be a negative, like life continues to grow and like evolve, and like things will eventually continue to move forward regardless of your actions. So it puts a lot of emphasis on like what you are doing in the moment, which is why I think also the use of the line like 7 seconds till the end, it's like maybe there's just this moment in time where there's an emphasis on what you're doing with this moment. But again, as like, I don't think that it's, sorry to go back to the original thing, which is that I don't think that that's tragic. I think that the tragedy of death is impactful and just what people are super fixated when they think about Final Fantasy VII, because that's a super impactful moment. But that's not the takeaway of the entire game. The takeaway, that is a part of a conversation that leads to the end of the game. So, yeah, I don't think that, and this is also why I think that what we're saying, and something that's been coming up again and again, is that I think Aerith's death is just a fixation of the audience for Rebirth, because that's that moment to a lot of people, is they feel like that's what Final Fantasy VII is. And I think the developers are using that against a lot of the people who are going to be playing the game. So I think watch out and don't expect it to be a tragedy. I think there will definitely be some darker moments, but that mentality is what's gonna like maybe cause a more trouble than it's worth.
For sure. BabySeal asked us a question here, and he's determined to get us killed by an angry mob of FF7 fans. He asked if you had to kill one character in FF7R to drive the narrative, who?
That's not even like there's not even a good joke answer to this, because it feels like a cop out to be like Red 13, because can't do that. What are we doing? I can tell you that my pick would probably be, because I feel like Aerith will just die. I feel like I can't even choose her, because that's also a cop out. So who other than Aerith?
Okay, so Sephiroth, right? He's gonna try to stab Aerith. He's gonna dodge out of the way, but he's gonna accidentally shish kebab Red 13 and Yuffie together. And then he's gonna hold him.
This is wrong. This is so wrong. Why are you making us do this?
And then he'll turn to the camera and he'll be like, "Well, Cloud, I guess this really was our Final Fantasy VII Rebirth."
And then the clown music starts playing, and then the credits start to roll.
Yeah. Cuts to black, and then Hollow starts playing. Hollow 2.
Hollow 2?
Yeah.
2 Hollow.
Yeah.
Oh my god. I think, if Marlene died, that would be fucked up. That'd be awful. That's actually not a terrible choice just to think about as like a thought experiment. I think Tifa, just because I'm gonna make that call, just because I feel like going there. I don't think that it will happen, but I think if you're really looking for something that will drive a narrative forward in a different direction, that's
I mean,
the choice.
I mean that would be like a wildly different direction, but that would be such an unpopular.
It'd be so wildly awful for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. People would do awful things if that happens.
There would be a dark day for a lot of people.
It would be pretty awful. So, Roxas asks, what's one thing both of you want the FF7 trilogy to do or a theme to tackle that you know will never happen or be controversial or too controversial to be okayed? Oh,
There's actually like a lot of serious answers that could go into that.
Yeah.
I think in general, like there's always been like sort of a darker element to this fantasy aspect of Cloud's sort of mental state. I think that dealing with that and talking about that in a way that is a lot more real would be very interesting. I don't think that they'll go there though. As much as I think that this will be like a darker chapter, I think just the conversation of that when it comes to him interacting with his friends, how somebody like that navigates like the world, and having that be more of a centerfold of conversation, I think would be really interesting to see. Having a more realistic take on like their characters' interactions, which is something that I've been kind of silently advocating for in terms of just when I'm talking about like this desynchronization thing on a much like lesser scale. I think that like Cloud's mental state is very disconnecting, and I think that can be very insightful if done right and tastefully. I just think that it will be done in the way that we know it to be from the original, not necessarily from what I'm suggesting. I don't think that would be the direction or maybe even what they would want to focus on, period. So that particular aspect for me.
There's like an interesting like world building aspect. Like this totally isn't even like related to like the main plot line necessarily, but there was always like this implication of like Mako addiction and like maybe people getting like high on Mako. I kind of wanted to see more of that, because that to me as like a world building aspect is really fascinating, and also adds a lot to how people are using Mako. And kind of the implication of what would happen if we became like a Mako-less society, right?
I definitely see that being.
Yeah.
There's a lot of what is being suggested here is just a lot of like realer depictions of what already exists in 7, I think, because the Mako addiction is super interesting. There's so many ways that you could just hyperfixate on one aspect of like what is introduced in Final Fantasy VII. And just be like super happy with that direction. I think.
Do a Breaking Bad in Final Fantasy VII, but instead it's Mako.
Dude, there's the next book right there. It's like
there you go. Yeah, that as a Nojima book would go like incredibly hard. Put that in like Ever Crisis or something, man. That would be.
I'm down. The Night Sky Prince chapter.
Yep. That for me would be like super awesome. Okay, I'll take 2 more questions, and I already see the 2 that I want to do. When the devs say that the re-trilogy links up to Advent Children, what do you think they mean by this?
Oh God, I hate that. I hate that answer because I feel like it. Also, here's the thing, is there's always this duality with listening to these quotes where it's like, you are the guy, I'm the guy who takes everything that's said very seriously and everything is important. That particular thing I feel like is such a limiting way of thinking about how this goes. And I hate that he even suggested it. Just because it puts a lot of stop to the thing that you would typically want as a developer, which is just for things to kind of run wild in the fan base and have people speculating until like you get to that moment where you know they buy the copy and then that's it. That's the ultimate goal, right? Of just like kind of having not the ultimate goal or like the singular goal, but just like an aspect of developing this conversation and this mystery is to keep people like coming back. So I think knowing where Advent Children starts is honestly like the worst possible place to end up. Because, and I think we've even talked about it in the past where it's like a Cloud like regressing back into how he was in the original from OG to Advent Children has always been sort of like a very sloppy sort of like way to get there, to get back to where they want to like have this conversation again. Not that I don't like it, I just think that you have to create a narrative flow into that. And I think if you are looking at it from a remake perspective where it's like you want to eventually arrive back in there, I really hate it because I want to see Cloud change very, very severely by a certain point in this trilogy. I don't want them to underplay that by sort of hinting at like Advent Children Cloud coming into the story like so quickly. I think that it actually stunts the character's potential growth into what this re-trilogy could be. I also think that the way that I'm like copiuming myself with this is that I think it comes down to the fact that you do have timelines kind of confirmed. I feel like what it will center the world back to like where it rightfully should be will be to just realign it with where things ultimately go. I still think that that's not a good case scenario. This is just my way of adapting my mindset to a terrible answer from a developer commentary. I also think that he's wrong because I think some of the ways that I think it was Kitase who said that.
Nomada also said it though too, but he said it like a few months back, and then Kitase said it again, and then that's what really got people riled up because you have both of them saying it. Yeah, when Nomada said it, he was like, the interviewer noted that he was kind of grinning, and he was very excited about the idea, and so, but Kitase seems to like. With like he just like elaborated like an entire paragraph where he was like, yeah, don't worry, it's still gonna link up to Advent Children, and they both actually used that word specifically, link up, which is also very fascinating, right?
I also think that is what, whenever you imply linking or unlinking or torn apart or whatever it is that they use to describe these sort of like these parts of the story is that all that my mind goes to is the live stream and what that signifies and how wildly weird that could be just depending on the approach that they take, because linking like the live stream weaves in and out of each other, like they kind of discussed in the opening of Ever Crisis, where these memories are sort of linking together to create whatever. So what that means and what that could mean to linking up to Advent Children could be a plethora of different things. I hope that it's in the vaguest way possible that it can.
Yeah. I think it'll be interesting too.
Not that I hate Advent Children or anything like that. That's actually quite the opposite. I just want them to just launch themselves into a very interesting new direction.
Right.
That's
I think what's also interesting to me too is that, Advent Children isn't the last part of the compilation chronologically. Dirge is.
With Genesis.
All right. It could be that, because Dirge is such like a not well received part of the compilation, they probably didn't want to say, yeah, this is all connected to Dirge of Cerberus.
Right.
Which sounds a lot worse. It sounds a lot worse than Advent Children, which Advent Children does have like its share of fans, right? And there are people that do love Advent Children. So it sounds a lot better to say, this connects to Advent Children, than to be like, yeah, actually.
Dirge of Cerberus, which
Yeah.
they also said something about when they were talking about remaking Dirge,
Right.
which is obviously not what people want to hear. And they also don't want to hear about Genesis. They don't want to hear anything about like those sort of more controversial elements, which I also think that that's still very much on the table. I actually am
100%. 100%.
more worried about him showing up now because of the Advent Children quote than I have ever. And I'm an advocate for it in a lot of ways. But it's going to be very interesting to see like what I like am not against the compilation on this one. Obviously, like my last 5-hour video is super centered on like Crisis Core. And I actually really grew to like a lot of the thematic structure of that game. I just want them to be again mindful and aware of and very precise about the use of any of these elements in a way where it feels like an addition or an expansion rather than a detraction. So there's a lot of dirge that could detract from the vibe of what this new trilogy is doing. I just hope that what they glean from it, like they did even with Vice and Nero, where it's just like they're just boss fights and well handled for characters that are wildly like not that interesting.
Yeah.
It's just going to be interesting to see how they play around with that. And I do expect Genesis, so I really am looking forward to people also changing their minds about that character or seeing what they can do to change people's minds about that character.
Right. I mean, if Genesis is going to appear anywhere, or at least in this game, it is not going to be in Cloud's timeline. I think it's going to be in Zack's. And Zack will be the one pursuing Genesis, if anything.
I think the end of Rebirth is going to be Genesis showing up and being like, we have to fix the timelines. And then the just cut to black moment. I'm not even kidding. I think that we're gonna have like this like let's fix the future moment, and you're just like, oh god.
Oh my god, that would be so funny.
We would all laugh.
Oh my god, that'd be so
it would be a lot
funny.
easier to. It would be a lot easier to sit and wait for like another 5 years about the game. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Jesus. Okay, I'll take this last one from my boy BabySeal, who asks, okay, so what new theme / lesson / social issue could you see FF7R tackling through its new plot elements? I don't know.
A new theme.
I think they'll just be tackling old ones in new ways, more than there being anything too profoundly new other than the Fate and Destiny stuff, which I think is like the most new thing.
I don't know because I actually haven't really thought about this all that much of like thematically because I've been so fixated on like the detailing and listing of what they do talk about, like whether that's just like visual imagery that is reoccurring. I do think that maybe it's not new, but I do think that the fact that one of the things I loved about the original Final Fantasy VII is that it felt like at a certain point, even though like the planet was the objective good, objective is like a very like weird term in Final Fantasy VII because it's like the planet could just decide to like end a civilization if it wanted to, and that's just the natural course of things. And the party is very, they will comment on it in the original, but it's not like something that they go into too much detail about, I think, or that maybe isn't as explored. You will hear them comment on it and be like, oh, that's like bogus. Like, why are the weapons attacking us or whatever? I do think that, I don't know, maybe just more of those world elements, sort of as you're implying, BabySeal, which is that like something that already exists or something that like Night Sky covered, like with the Mako thing, where it's just like more additional objective things that it's like, is this something that humanity is using poorly? Is this like another aspect of like the social construct, or like the way that our modern world is constructed, and just having more of a dialogue about that, which is like the use of technology or the use of this or that, and just sort of going more into detail about those things would be interesting. I don't think that if they do that, it's going to be like a huge conversation, but it would be nice to see. Yeah, I don't know. I mainly with you on this one, which is it just feels like a lot of old stuff covered in a new way.
Yeah. So. That, or I have to argue again, Mako addiction.
Right.
I just think that's so fascinating, especially when you tie that back into corporate greed and capitalism, which are already kind of themes in the game, and how those two tie together. I think that would actually be profoundly interesting and add so much to the world building. And
well,
also
actually, you have that character, the mayor or whatever of Calm, or I think he's the mayor, or he's just some dude, or he's the owner of the inn. He's dealing with like a secret illness. I think my takeaway from that was Mako poisoning.
Yeah.
It not because everyone's like geostigma. I was like, well, that's not happening. Not this early in the story, I don't think. But dealing with Mako poisoning would be a really interesting thing to see, where it's like not necessarily such a heavy case of it, but something that has like clearly like affected him deeply to maybe where he like. There's actually I will actually go back to Cyberpunk's Edge Runners for this. With the use of the, what is it called? The drug in that they use?
Talking about brain dances?
Yes. Where they're like, yeah, that would be an interesting thing, because essentially Mako poisoning is just the flooding of memories, a knowledge that is just overwhelming the person. So phasing in and out of like what that is, or what that experience could be, would be a really interesting visual thing to see. In the story, perhaps.
Yeah. BabySeal says, I'd love to see them tackle Big Pharma. Actually, I mean, that's how it kind of would, right? Because it would, Mako addiction, and then tying into Big Pharma. That would also be really thematically interesting. Again, that kind of goes back to the question of like what we would want to see happen that would never get approved, because it'd probably be like a little too controversial. But that would be like profoundly interesting to me to tackle that as, because it's already an existing thing in FF7's world. So if they were just to go deeper into that and to just elaborate on it, again, it would take the world building and make it like, and make it so good, make it so powerful. Not that it isn't already, but it would bring out a lot of things in FF7's world that would make it feel a lot more real.
I do think and maybe we're being, or maybe not you, but maybe in my mind, I'm being a little bit more pessimistic about like these sort of like larger conversations coming up. But I really do think that after playing the demo, and something that I really have been having fun thinking about, and just talking to people who haven't, like, because people ask me like, what was like the big takeaway, other than like, well, people will say like combat and all this other stuff, but the way that the world is really built out, and just thinking that the whole first game was just Midgar, and how fleshed out that was, and having gone through Under Junon a little bit and being very fixated on that during my demo playthrough, it feels like a bite-sized version, not bite-sized but condensed Midgar. So what I mean by that is that you're getting the full package of what everything meant about Midgar in this moment, where you're now just like walking through a smaller area like Under Junon. It feels like you're just getting a huge burst of the atmosphere and the characters and like what life is like under there, and the contrast between them being that like Midgar is like the biggest Shinra controlled area, because that's literally the epicenter of it, whereas Under Junon, while it's Under Junon, it feels like it's a lot more unruly and there's less control that Shinra has over it. And I feel like this will be a reoccurring thing as we're getting farther and farther away from Midgar. We'll see the less and less control that Shinra has over like the areas that we're exploring. But my point was to say is that you get a strong sense of the differences between these areas and different conversations starting to arise because of it. Like, it feels like a rebellion could, like, there's like a fuse lit in Under Junon where things could probably go south really quickly if there wasn't, like, if there was just a little bit more public unrest. Whereas like Midgar feels very controlled, and that they, even though like things get out of hand, they have such a tight knit on like the media there, all of this information. Whereas like Under Junon could just snap in two in a second, and there could just be a full blown rebellion between like the Under Junon and Junon itself. Whether or not that would be like successful or not, or something like that, is completely it's a Junon's favor. But my point is to say that like there's small anecdotes that you could totally see happening where, like somebody already mentioned, the hospital that we visit where the guy is studying the Sephiroth clones, that could be a perfect place to bring up this conversation that you're sort of having about big pharma, or like these things that feel a little bit more big discussions, just maybe not the focus of them, of the
right game.
Exactly,
right. Things that you can find maybe side quests about, or little notes and stuff like that you can read into that allow you to, without pulling it to the forefront.
Yes,
there was someone who said something interesting in here that I had wanted to mention. I don't know. I guess
while you're finding that, I can just answer one if you want to keep looking for it, because somebody's mentioning the 90s aesthetic. There's this really great thing in the demo.
I saw that too. I kind of wish that it looked a little bit more 90s too, because there's like modern smartphones and stuff. I'm like, I wish they had like, like flip phones or something. Go on.
Yeah, well, honestly, me too, because they use that so prominently in Before Crisis. But there's this area in the demo called Magnata Books, which is like a tucked away bookshop. And there's this I don't know if you know what this is, but I think it's called like the Mouth of Truth, which I can't remember what culture this comes from, but it's like this, relic from history, or at least that's what it looks like, where if you stick your hand in this stone like coin's mouth and you tell a lie, it will bite your fingers off. It sort of has this aesthetic. This just giant coin with this face on it, in this bookstore in fucking Final Fantasy VII that looks just like it. But the point was to say is that they have this coin embedded in the wall, and wires, just like thick, like old school, like Genova doll wires hanging off of the side of this. And you're looking at the contrast of that like old historic object with these wires. And it's like, this was always my favorite part of the aesthetic of Final Fantasy VII. That was the allure of the Genova doll to me, where it's like this like metallic angel that is like very haunting. And that feels like something out of like Ghost in the Shell maybe, or like something from that era. So I do feel like they are not like unaware of like that aesthetic that Final Fantasy VII has in itself. So I feel like maybe it's not going to directly go to the 90s stuff, but they will definitely look at what made this cool and just make it more of that. And if that's back to 90s or like reinventing the character or like a monster or whatever to make it more modern, I think you can probably expect there to be like an injection of that for sure.
I'll probably get like roasted for saying this, but like the biggest tragedy of the first game to me was the elevator.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
Do you know what I'm talking about? The elevator in Mako Reactor 1. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, remember getting in the Mako Reactor in OG, and it was cyberpunk as fuck, and it looked like you were in like an alien spaceship. And that elevator was so cool. It was so cool and so like it says like holy crap, like these Mako reactors are so futuristic, and like it was like peak 90s like cyberpunk Ghost in the Shell aesthetic. It was so cool. And then in Remake you get into it and it just has white walls.
Yeah, it's like super dull. Oh, you're so right.
Yeah. I was like what did they do? I get it though. I get it. I guess the reason why was probably because that is like a really intricate scene or like a really intricately designed elevator in the original. Someone spent a lot of time designing that elevator in the original, right?
Yes.
And then I guess when they looked at recreating that with modern CG graphics, they were like, that's a little too much. We'll just put a normal elevator in here.
But put some walls on the side and a counter for and then we'll just call it a day. It's probably honestly a reused asset now that you're saying that from like one other elevator in the game. I'm gonna have to go look and see if it looks anything like any of the other elevators.
Oh yeah, I think they use that elevator like maybe twice actually. But in the original game, but it's like the elevator was so cool and so like mood setting. And I get it, it's just an elevator, it's not a big deal. But I love that elevator. And the elevator, like you could just post a screenshot of that elevator and everyone will comment on it and they'll be like, yeah, bro, that's so iconic.
Yeah, everybody will be like, that's when the games were good.
Yeah,
elevators like this.
Yeah, back when they made elevators, like they don't make elevators like that anymore.
I do think that sort of like cohesion aspect of it is sort of why I can understand maybe getting rid of it, but at the same time, it's like that's the parts that you hope that they just don't get rid of or that they still find like important is. And I hope, for instance, and I said all this stuff about the Under Junon shop and this like really cool aesthetic thing. I'm almost going to guarantee you that that's going to be a reused asset. And I really hope that it isn't. Like in my mind's eye, I want every shop to be like very different. But the in that same demo, I saw like 4 instances of like reused assets for like paintings and shit like that, where you're just like, well, this is just the realistic aspect of like game development. But at the same time, it's like you just want every little detail to be filled out with like something neat. So
yeah. As long as it's not, like Final Fantasy 15 where they like literally copy and paste it like gas stations across, and so every like little settlement that you came across was like vaguely just like the same assets kind of shuffled around, slightly different.
No, for sure, and that makes sense.
That was pretty bad, yeah.
It definitely is something though that I like. Remake has a high bar, Rebirth has a high bar to hit. I think just because like all of their zones are so iconic, I really don't want them to feel anywhere near the same as one another. I think that they should all be like very independent and just as defining as like sort of how they made Midgar. But the reality of the situation is that is probably definitely going to happen in all instances of every pocket of each like part of the game. I'm sure that the like bookstore is going to have the same like something similar to the last one or whatever. But
yeah. Okay, I think this is a good place to wrap things up. So my guy, please tell everyone where they can find you.
You guys can find me on YouTube. Just look up Sleepezi, EZI. I am currently sort of in the back, sort of making more content. I have a whole demo experience to talk about where I lost, like it was the experience of playing it and also playing the demo was very interesting. I'll say that. So I talk about it all in this new video that's coming up. It's a very exciting thing for me to have that done. A lot of new elements I'm introducing, some animation, some more effects and stuff like that. So I hope you guys are enjoying of the new kind of direction of content that I'm making, and along with projects that are unrelated to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth that are also being made, which I'm also super excited about. That is going to take a lot longer, just depending on how much research I can actually do. But just look out for that in the future. And then also I will be, the most recent thing that's going to happen is the Game Awards. I will be streaming that soon, hopefully for some Rebirth content. So if you guys are looking to get that, sit in and get the full breakdown of some Rebirth discussion at some point for that, that would be the day, or check out the VOD. And then, yeah, I think, and I also stream on Twitch if you guys are interested in that. So
awesome, man. We love to see it. I'm really curious on what you're working on for content outside of Rebirth. That's very fascinating. I've always told you that I think you could totally just be an essayist. Like,
I love the format of that, and I also feel the same way. And I feel the same way about you. Or if not, then I'm telling you right now. I very much think that your opinions are like class A, and I enjoy listening to you break down about anything. So any content that you dive into, man, I'm like all for it. And also, weirdly enough, I know that we're wrapping up, but that's definitely what I took away from the 16 event, is just being around all of you guys who also create. Really, I think unconsciously gave me the courage to just be like, you know what? It doesn't have to just be like Final Fantasy VII. It can be all sorts of stuff, because we kind of just somehow ended up, being invited to this thing. And
exactly,
that is all because of the things that you create. So I think for anybody out there trying to make any other content, or maybe stuck in like a hole of that, it's just like the stuff that you're making gets you someplace. See what the other stuff gets you, where that takes you. That's why I'm kind of diving into like all these other medias and stuff like that right now, and just super enjoying it. But I'm glad you're excited. I'm excited, and I'm excited to see what all of us do.
Yep, me too. I'm diving into new stuff myself right now. So making videos on Cyberpunk and Zelda and all these other games that I want to talk about. So I hope you guys look forward to it.
I'm 100% excited for the Cyberpunk. That's another one I want to play so bad.
Oh man, dude, I love Cyberpunk so much. You gotta play 2077. You gotta do the DLC Phantom Liberty. It's going to be like, this is like, trust me, it's going to be peak video games for you, especially Phantom Liberty, man. You're gonna walk away from it. Yeah, you're gonna walk away from it and just be like, man, this is great. This is like why I play games. It's definitely one of those games, at least for me. That's how I walked away from it.
Definitely excited for it.
When will I be streaming again? I'll be streaming again soon. The next major stream will probably be again for the Game Awards, and then also too, I want to make these like maybe a bi-weekly podcast is what I want to get to with this. And so I think like making 2 episodes of this every month will be probably a sweet spot. So
also, I'm so glad that these are back.
Yes,
absolutely.
I'm surprised you haven't played it yet. That's like,
I'm super big
Bloodborne.
Like,
yeah,
into those games. They're the best. I haven't finished Elden Ring either. I'm so bad, dude. I feel like I have to just jump off this call and play like 5 video games that I've been talking about.
You do. Start with Cyberpunk.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. We're going to raid my friend here. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and then go and hop over to Sleepezi's channel and make sure that you are also subscribed. Until next time, guys, love you, and I'll see you later.